being at the same time. But I love it when that happens because it's such a joy to me to see them awaken and into their joyful state that is a true state, that is their real, authentic self. And so as we explore this monthly theme of be light in delight, that's just the whole point of it all. Is for us to know that we are the light of God, for us to be in delight with that idea. And it's simply not just a nice idea, it's the concept that is immaculate. It is the concept that is perfect. You know, on this day, which happens to be in the Catholicism world of Christianity, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, I want to explore those concepts that are immaculate, not the ones that are imagined, not the ones that are delusional. We're moving into a Buddha mind state of awareness. And so when we say that the topic is Buddha mind equals immaculate conception, from biology to theology, the science of mastery. What we're talking about is going beyond the realm of appearances, going beyond the realm of old and antiquated concepts which have nothing to do with eternal truth, and moving into an awareness of how that is happening in our lives and how that is outpicturing in the lives of all around us. And as you noticed when you were in that meditative thought for the week from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he was inviting you to imagine your own body as the deity. He was inviting you to imagine that not only is your body the deity, but all of the surrounding environment and all of the sentient beings are also the deity. And so when you look around, all that you can possibly see is God. And so when you are going even beyond the realm of the senses, you have an idea that there is something else here. There is another aspect of me that is present. Even when we were in the meditation, we were able to hear like the door opening, or not necessarily simply because the door was opening. You could tell that there was a presence who remained, and you could tell that another presence came who remained, and you were able to feel the vibration of an extension of yourself. And so what I know is that what I see and know goes beyond my physical senses. What I see at the level of my spirit goes beyond my eyesight or my capacity to see greater or lesser what is happening in the realm of effects. I was in Willowbrook over at Solder World on Friday night. I had been welcomed there by my beloved friends Patty and Katerina. And it was a healing service that people came to release anything that was not serving them. And in the process of each person getting an individual healing, in the process of that happening, what came through to Patty was that the children from Sandy Hook arrived. And they had not yet realized that they were dead. They had made their presence known, asking for direction, asking to be released, asking to be set free into their proper place in the realm of eternity. And so we were able to move and through that and surround them with love and support them in their journey. The energy of the room was so great in terms of the people's willingness to release the garbage and to release that which does not serve them, that Katerina asked me to assist in clearing the room. And I was not part of the program. I was there for my healing, but at the same time, I became an instrument for the clearing of what needed not to be any longer. Such are we. Even though we are each here seeking our healing, and we come to places like this, wanting to know something greater for our lives, wanting to know something greater for ourselves, at the same time, it doesn't happen just off to the side here, or let me do this for me and then I'll do that for them. It happens simultaneously. It is the reason that ministers become ministers, so that they can continue to do the work on themselves while they're allowing other people to be conduits for their own healing processes. You know, sometimes I turn on the radio when I'm on my way here. Sometimes I turn on a CD I want to hear. Sometimes I just want to be silent. But I don't remember who the preacher was this morning. He was saying, it's the haters! The haters! You know you're doing something good when the haters come. Because there's something that comes up when you are the light. When you are the light, that the darkness is absolutely calling for something greater, even for itself, even though it may seem and appear to want to be totally attached to being that darkness. So, it is for us to really be able to explore what it means to be unattached to those things that appear to be real, so that we can absolutely be in the reality of our truth. So when we let our souls surrender to the heart of God, we're able to go beyond all of those things that have caught our attention. Buddha says we are shaped by our thoughts. We become what we think. When the mind is pure, joy follows like a shadow that never leaves. And so I'm now reminded that I did not do the inspirational reading after the Tell Me Something Good. So I'm going to share with you what Ernest Holmes has to say about such things. The great mystics like Jesus have taught that as we enter into the one enters into us and becomes us and is us. They have taught the mystical marriage, the union of the soul of man with the soul of God, and the unity of all life. The great mystics, while sensing this unity, the universality of all things, have also sensed the individualization of being and the individuality of man as a divine reality. Tagore, in seeking to explain this, says that the individual is immersed in, but not lost in, nirvana. And he uses the illustration as an arrow is lost in its mark, still remaining an arrow. The mysticism of Buddha did not teach the annihilation of the soul, but the eternality of an ever-expanding principle of the soul. The highest mental practice is to listen to this inner voice and to declare its presence. The greater a man's consciousness of this indwelling I am, the more fully he will live. This will never lead to illusion, but will always lead to reality. All great souls have known this and have constantly striven to let the mind of God express through their mentalities. The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. This was the declaration of the great master, and it should be ours also. Not a limited sense of life, but a limitless one. So this is what we're looking for. We already know, took all the classes in lack and limitation, got the diploma and the degree. So now we want to move now into another level of our understanding. We want to move from a Buddha mind. And moving from a Buddha mind really means totally being available, totally being present to what is, without labeling it good, without labeling it bad, without labeling it better or worse, without labeling it as something desirable or undesirable. Because when you get into the territory of that which is desired, then it is time for you to know that you need to really, really, really be able to release that desire, because it's going to be something that is leading you to your suffering. When you have an attachment to something, then you are setting yourself up for being miserable. When you have an expectation for something to be a certain way, someone to look a certain way, whether it means the time that you sell your house expediently or the time that you find your divine right mate expediently, whatever those things that might be that you're attached to having in a certain time frame, then you have to know that you are now setting yourself up for a level of disappointment, for a level of despair. And so when this prince who chose to move beyond the realm of everything that he could ever think that he wanted, because he happened to go out one day and be able to see that there is something called illness, there is something called old age, there is something called death, there are things that people are experiencing and that do not look like the world that I've been living in. He was sheltered from all of these things and began to realize that these things were happening outside of the realm of what appeared on the physical reality to be nirvana, but at the same time, at the level of his soul, he was craving something more. He was desiring a greater fulfillment of his essence. And so as he embarked on this journey, he let himself be in the stillness. He let himself be immersed even in the thoughts and ideas about the suffering that was appearing to be around him. He let himself be totally present to what was without attaching any meaning to it, but absolutely knowing that he was choosing to be an instrument for the healing of his heart that so cried for those who were suffering at the same time, so cried for himself not being able to identify or be able to restore something that was perfect, that he knew at the level of his soul was meant to be. And so the Buddha mind is one that is totally beyond delusion. The Buddha mind is one that is totally beyond attachment. As I was sitting in the Rockefeller Chapel on Wednesday evening, I was sitting with Buddhists there, as had been my intention to do for a while, and had found myself in this dissertation that was being shared by the author who was chosen at that time, as he was saying something to the extent of really being aware that any idea of even being a Buddha is in itself totally off the point. Any idea of being something other than what you are is totally off the point. Labeling something good or bad is not the point at all. So you have to understand that when you move into an immaculate concept, that concept has nothing to do with anything that has happened before. You know, the Bible has many different aspects of conception that's mentioned throughout it. So does the science of mind. But essentially, that means the state of a belief. And so when you're caught in the state of one belief, it's pretty hard for another belief to find its way in there, because it's pretty much a solid kind of thing. If it had a physical manifestation, it would probably even look like an iceberg of some kind. Because that's how staid we get in our beliefs, and that's how anything that runs into them seems to fall apart, rather than that belief falling apart. It's like even a Titanic in all of its beautiful engineering wasn't able to withstand this belief that felt so very solid and so very real, even though it was not. Because what had been feared became a reality. And so that is how we can allow ourselves to know that we don't have to choose a thought to be substantial just because it came through our awareness. We don't have to choose that belief simply because it's what we believed in before. Because when you're willing to come into an awakened state of mind, when you're willing to come into a greater dedication to your essence, you can see that everything must change, the least of which is not you. In the idea of an immaculate conception, we think of something as being birthed. We think of something that's coming into fruition. There's a few times as we were studying on Monday night when I'm with my Kabbalah, Science of Mind, and Tarot colleagues, but just exploring that one idea of conception. When God said to Abraham, I'm going to give you a child, I'm going to let your wife birth something new, you are going to be the father of a people, there was some hesitation in his mind because his belief was, I am of a certain age, my wife is of a certain age, my wife has never bore a child up to now, she's in her 90s, I'm 100, what are you talking about? So Abraham was not willing to shift into a new concept because he was so anchored into what he saw happening previous to that moment, so much so that he wasn't open to God's idea of something else. Same thing happened to Zechariah, Elizabeth's husband. He was a priest, and he went into the temple, and God said, I'm going to give you a child, and doggone it if Zechariah didn't do the same thing. What are you talking about? I don't have any children. My wife can't have any kids. What are you talking about? And at that moment, God made him shut up. So he couldn't even talk. It was like God wasn't even having it. It's like this fool needs to be still and know that I am God in the midst of everything. And it wasn't until he was able to conceive. At that time, the son was always named after the father. And the mother was like, oh yeah, we're going to name him Zechariah. And no, they were saying, oh yeah, you're going to name him Zechariah. And she was like, no, I think his name is John. And then they went to Zechariah and they said, what is his name? And he hadn't been talking, I don't know why they asked him, but he wrote down his name is John, the beloved one. That's what John means. And then, at that moment, he was enabled to talk because now he was able to know that he was the beloved and that he had been now given the opportunity to give birth to a new way of loving that he had not known before. He was able to give birth to an idea of love that had never been conceived before. He was now awakened to this great new being. Same thing happened to Mary. When Gabriel came and said, and Gabriel was the same angel that had been talking over to Elizabeth and Zechariah and them, and he said, you know, you're going to give birth. And Mary is like, what are you talking about? I don't know a man. What are you talking about? And even Mary, who had been devoted, whose very nature of her being was total dedication to the Spirit, even her concept of the way things always were had to shift, had to fall away, had to absolutely be dispelled from her awareness so that something new could be born. It's the same idea of a Buddha mind. You have to be open to something new birthing in order for you to be able to move into your true purpose, your true dharma, your true reason for being. obviously the way you've been doing it has not been working. So it is time to do something different. So we're moving from biology and all that you were taught in terms of the birds and the bees, and how things are recreated and how things are coming into being. You know, biology is simply the study of living organisms, to say, oh, this is how that happened. Oh, this is how this rose came out. And go, oh, okay, I get it all. I know it all. You know how you get when you think you know it all, then you get stuck and you can't learn anything else. So the biology is not where we're going to stop our attention. We're going to move into the theology, which is really about the deity, what Augustine of Hippo called the discussion concerning the deity, what Richard Hooker called the science of all things divine, but what Webster said is the study of religious faith, practice, and experience, especially the study of God and of God's relation to the world. But it doesn't really matter how God has been relating to John or Jim or Sue or Mary or Linda. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what your conversation with God is, how God is relating to you, and how you are able to listen to that, how you are able to be receptive to that, how you are able to embrace that. Because the science means knowledge. And generally when you think of knowledge, you're thinking about mental knowledge. And that's what science does in one dimension, is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in a testable explanation and is able to give us ideas that can provoke us to predict what might be happening in the universe next. But the science is a body of knowledge that can be rationally explained and reliably applied is even limited. Just because somebody has been in prison for 27 years, you can't possibly expect them to be the president of that country. That's not what we've experienced. Nobody that's been in jail for 27 years could ever be the leader of a country, especially a country that has consistently oppressed anyone who looked like him. How can a man who has studied law, now listen to the scientific aspects of this, a man who has studied law to see just what the laws are in this region that people are to adhere to, and how we can uphold this, and how we can use this as the framework for our joy to be achieved, to be acquired, to be embodied. And then to find out that the very laws that are in place are not serving the people that are most dear to me. I then move from being a lawyer to being an activist, not unlike our president. But I move into a way that makes me feel as though I am being part of the process. I am being part of the solution. And so when I move into that with all the passion that I have, and with all of my concepts about what pain is and what suffering is, and how I want to alleviate suffering in this young Buddha kind of mind, and how this man went to prison because he appeared to be a threat because of the plans that they had for being able to destroy edifices so that they can make their points about the injustice, and how it was not real for these people to know this kind of existence, that this was not the will of God. And in truth, there was a dimension of that concept that was real. Something greater was asking to be birthed. And so, as our dear friend Mary Morrissey sat with President Mandela some years after he had been released, and she said, well, how could this happen? How could someone go from here to here? I want to understand, because Mary, Mary's one of us. She wants to find out where the truth is and to support everybody else in finding what truth is. And he said, the man that went into that prison those 27 years ago is not the man who came He said the man who went into that prison would have never been able to get out of prison. The man who went into that prison would have never been able to be the president of a country. Because that man was angry. That man was frustrated. And all he could focus on was what the effects were. Now I'm not talking from Mandela's point of view anymore, but I'm moving into the concept that was being birthed. And so what he was saying then was that he went through a transformation. He had to release what he thought should be the way to change. And he had to let his soul surrender to something greater in order for something greater to be birthed. And so as he allowed himself to be present in the stillness, even in the sadness, he was willing to let his heart be open to the heart of God. And in this transformative process, he was no longer that caterpillar that was struggling to be something else, but he was now emerging, a butterfly, a beautiful instrument for uniting what appeared to be hate against hate towards people who were in the same land, living with one another, looking differently. And so as you saw the athletes, the soccer players standing arm in arm, hand in hand, in absolute grief for this man who had brought them together and had allowed them to release the burden of their old beliefs. And to know that there was something about Mandela that had been ordained from his very birth. You know, the way that they name when you're in Africa, that it has to do with them really understanding your nature. And you know, his middle name really meant troublemaker. And he was a troublemaker like Jesus was a troublemaker. He saw things the way that they were and knew that they could be better. He saw the way that people were believing and invited them to have a new idea about how life could be. And so when you understand that even after he was a president and had retired from politics, they still sought his advice, Mandela's advice. And he said, I'm no longer a politician. You need to talk to the politicians about that, because he had used his immaculate concept to free himself and to free his country, and now he was eternally free and not able, not even having the capacity or the desire to be caught up in that old mess, because something perfect had been conceived. So when I say that this immaculate conception is synonymous with the Buddha mind, I want you to understand that in these four noble truths of suffering, and the truth of the origin of suffering, and the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. All of that really has to do with what I was talking about. You know, when you go into that eightfold path that Buddha talks about, right seeing and right intention, and right speech and right action, there isn't anything that you can put on that can make you be right. It is simply something that you have to take off. As I've told you in my visioning classes, or even in abbreviated sessions of visioning, that any spiritual growth has to do with letting go. So if you're willing to let go of those old beliefs, like Abraham had to, if you're willing to let go of those old beliefs like Zechariah had to, if you're willing to let go of those old beliefs like Mary had to, if you're willing to let go of those old beliefs like Nelson Mandela had to, then you can move from a biology state of being into a theology state of being, where you're not simply studying the God of someone else's teaching, but you're studying the God of your own being. Even in the stillness, you're allowing yourself to move into a greater expression of the divine that you were divinely intended to be. So I want you to know that you don't have to be caught up in the delusion. You don't have to even trust your senses, for what you see may not be what is real. What you hear may not be what is true. but at the level of your soul, you know it. I always ask my students to prove what I'm saying and not simply accept it at the face value of what I said. Because we are scientists, we have to apply testable means of evidence in order to be able to establish and discern truth. So I invite you to know that when your mind is pure, joy follows like a shadow that never leaves. That's what Buddha said. But can you think, can you just picture in your mind's eye the face of Nelson Mandela? Can you just see that smile that is just so permanent there? Can you just know that the mind pure absolutely is the ground for joy to follow, for joy to be omnipresent? And so I invite you to go ahead and ignite that light within you. Go ahead and release those beliefs that don't serve you. Be willing to take experiments with your life that bring you into an alignment and an absolute embodiment of what it means to be the light, to enjoy your journey, not only